Hi, John Miares again from the USDA NASS Great Lakes Regional Field Office in East Lansing, Michigan. In this presentation, I want to look at a few specific things you might run into as you're doing your survey work. First, I want to look at how to change an ag tract to a non-ag tract, and then we can look at how we might change what was a non-ag tract in previous years into an ag tract this year because you learned that there is now a horse in the operator's backyard. Then we will look at how to go about submitting the segment level record once you have accounted for all of the tracts in the segment. Let's suppose that the ag tract operator in tract F is no longer involved in farming and sold off or is renting all of the land that they were farming on to the operator of tract E. I'm going to go into tract F and I'm going to say, well, if the person who was there last year perhaps passed away or perhaps sold everything and no longer lives there, then I'm going to check no, and this tract will be marked as being no longer in the segment. However, for this example, let's suppose that the person who was operating the tract last year still lives at the home, but just rents out all of the surrounding farmland. I'm going to go into tract F and I'm going to say, well, let's suppose they're still in the segment and we can account for this all here, still verify the address, but we're going to screen this operator out by answering no to all the screening questions. How many acres are inside the red lines now? I'm going to say that there's only 5 acres left, and all that's left is the residence. There is no potential for agriculture because we're going to assume that the rest of the acres are going to go to tract E. So I'm going to submit that and send it on its way. Let's suppose that I have an operator who last year was non-ag, but this year tells you that now they have a horse. I'm going to click on C3 to open up the screener there. Did I operate inside the lines? Yes. I'll have the screening information. The address and information has not changed, so I'll verify it. All right, we've marked off the tract on the photo. So I'll click next. There's no crops grown or hay cut. The respondent tells you there's no livestock or poultry, but probably isn't thinking of the horse as livestock. Their agricultural products sold? No. Any crops in storage? No. Any hogs or pigs? No. Horses and ponies? Yes. Now that I've answered yes to a screening question, we don't need to answer any more screening questions. So as soon as I click or tap on next, I can proceed directly to the start of the ag tract questionnaire. I've just taken a non-ag operator and said that they have a horse in their backyard. So based on that, I am going to have to complete an ag tract questionnaire for this operator. The ag tract questionnaire is going to follow the same standards as you normally would see for most other questionnaires. I'm going to say that there's a 0.8 acre farmstead and that there's 2 acres of pasture. There's going to be no other crops here. Scroll through these real fast. There's nothing double cropped. I'll just leave that blank. We'll say section D was reported. Total acres, 2.8. Verify total acres equals tract acres. That should not be a problem. No AUM land. There's no cropland on this operation. How many acres are in CRP? We'll have none. You can either leave that blank or enter a 0. Are there any fruit trees? No. Small grains? No. Any corn? No. Soybeans? No. Seeding of new alfalfa? No. Storage capacity? None. For things that you would want to put into storage, I'm going to check the none box rather than type a 0 into the cells. There were no stocks on hand, so we can leave that blank. No hogs and pigs, no intentions for hogs and pigs. No cattle, no intentions for cattle. No sheep or lambs. No goats and kids. Yes, there was a horse. There was one horse, and it was owned. Will they have anyone on the payroll? No. Total market value, I'm going to say $280,000. That it was a decrease from last year of about 5%. How much is cropland? How much is permanent pasture? I'll say $1,500 for the pasture, that all the values in the building. Agricultural sales, none. Do they have any abandoned crops or anything like this? No. They wouldn't have any government payments. They don't have any cover crops. They have pasture and rangeland. We'll say 2 acres of permanent pasture. They don't have any field crops or any hay or any woodland crops. No nursery, no fruits, no berries. But they do have the horse, which was already recorded in section K, so I don't need to record it here. There was no farm income, and in fact, the only agriculture that's associated with this operation is the horse. So I'm going to just click on that as a horse. When you click next, you're going to continue on to the next section of the questionnaire. Once you have all of the individual tracts accounted for in the segment, it's now time to get ready to submit the entire segment. You'll notice over on the right-hand side in the status that I have tract B is no longer in the segment, and remember they were replaced by tract G. All of the individual tracts accounted for, the ones that are listed here as my ags, I could go back in and review the data, but I cannot update it after I've submitted it. The ones that are non-ag will have their POIDs grayed out. In order to submit the entire segment, I first must click on the summary button. The summary button is going to let me know what I have accounted for in here, that the screeners have been completed and that the tract records have been completed. I also need to check to see whether I have accounted for all of my acres in the segment. My RADA, although it does fall between 90 and 110, is perhaps a little lower than what some supervisors or statisticians in some regions might like it to be. Perhaps this is going to be a case where we may need to have some of the tracts remeasured with acreage grids to verify the recorded acres are correct. If you do find that something was recorded incorrectly, you may need to work with your regional field office to have the tracts that you have submitted unlocked in CAPI so you can resubmit those tracts with the correct acreage. In some cases, those missing acres may be accounted for by roads that pass through the segment that aren't being accounted for under anyone else's tract. In that case, you would need to add a new non-ag tract to account for those roads. You might also discover, upon inspecting the aerial photo, that there was some piece of the segment that was completely overlooked and wasn't accounted for by one of the other tracts. For the purposes of this example, I'm going to pretend that I missed a 40-acre tract in a part of the segment that accounted for the town garage and a gravel pit. Maybe when I drew it off on the photo, I had assumed it was part of someone else's tract, but then the acres just got miscounted, or I just missed it completely. So what I'm going to say, I'm going to add one more new non-ag tract to this segment. It adds a new line. I have to click back on the screener. We'll say that we have here, I have to put a new name, Town of Orford. And we'll just enter this information in here. We don't have much that we can add, but we can fix it there. Is there anything agricultural? No, 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 and no, and no. How many acres are inside the lines? We're going to say it's 40 acres, and I will type in a description here that will say this is a gravel pit, town garage, general equipment, and waste. Does it have agricultural potential? No. And then looking at my list, we're going to call this obvious non-ag. I suppose we could call it government land, but I'll just call it obvious non-ag. And I will submit the survey. I need to wait for all of the data to make it all the way submitted before I can do everything here. Those numbers are going to go down to 0, and we won't have any more data to submit. Of course, it should go without saying that you should never just add a tract like this into your CAPI instrument without also adding it to your paper screener forms and drawing off the boundaries of the tract on your aerial photo. Also, keep in mind that when adding new tracts, CAPI always uses the next available tract letter. So the letter created by the CAPI instrument for this tract needs to match what was written on the screening form and the photo. If they aren't, make sure that what is on the screening form and on the photo match what was submitted in CAPI in order to minimize confusion. Once I've added my last tract, I can go to my summary and I can see that the sum of the reported acres is now really, really close to the 634. I have 3 ag tracts. I have 4 non-ag tracts. I don't have any PIGA tracts, which we don't have in this region, for 7 total tracts. We have 632.6, which is very, very close to the actual digitized acres. My RADA ratio is very close to 100. So I can submit this segment. Am I sure I'd like to submit the segment? I hit OK, and you will see on the gray bar that the status of the segment is complete. Also, once you've submitted the segment, if I click on the summary, you'll notice that Submit Segment button has disappeared. And that is how we're going to account for an entire segment.